Okay, should be recording now.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's looks like 2 minutes after 9. And welcome to everybody who's attending. Do we have, I don't think we have guests.
Let's see. So just real quick, you do see Omar on the screen as well. He's not here physically present, so Dave Hall has volunteered to chair the meeting for us today. And I do see that there's up to 10 individuals. I don't know if those are, if they're on camera or not.
Good morning, y'all.
Is that Sal?
Yep,
Hi, Sal. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Annette?
Good, thank you. So let me ask, are you, there you are. Okay, great. All right, I see
On
Sal.
camera. Okay.
Is there anyone else? The ones that we have present right now, I could see that Lisa McCracken-Mayers, can you introduce yourself? You're still on the line?
Hi, can you hear me?
Ma'am.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Lisa Mayers McCracken. I'm with the Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. And then
Yes, ma'am.
we have Judy Albus with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation District. I do see that Anita Keys is joining us. Thank you, Anita. Hi there. Let's see. And does anybody else want to announce themselves who might be on the phone and not? I know that Gonzalo is here as well. Cedios. Anyone else present?
This is Larissa Place with Texas Department of Agriculture. I'm online.
Thank you, Larissa. Appreciate it.
Good morning. This
Hi,
is
this is-
Judy Lucille with the Texas Division of Emergency Management.
Yes, Judy, thank you. Judy is representing TDEM for us, and she came on a few months ago, or several months ago now, for Tim Freer, so I will make that correction. Okay. Anyone else?
This is Delbert. I don't know if you can hear me. Just letting you know the phone number is me.
Okay, and you're on both. Okay, great. Thank you, Delbert.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, and then for AECOM, Gilbert, do you want to announce who's here from the AECOM team?
Yeah, let me go ahead and announce, well, we've got myself, starting with me, Gilbert Ondujo. We've got Brian Blaisdell. We've got Lily Cartwright. We've got Jeff Urban, Alejandra Marco, and Chris Wright. And also from Barracuda, we've got Marina Monsivais.
Is there anyone, let's see if there's anyone else that did not announce. I think we're good. Okay, so I'll turn it back to you. Dave?
Is there any member that would like to give any kind of an update here before we get started on any other event maybe that's going on that has relevance? Okay, I guess that was enough time allowed. Annette, you want to handle the minutes?
Yes, you all have the minutes from the last meeting, which was November the 2nd. Right now, I'm pulling up the agenda just so everybody we can see that on the screen. I'm sorry I didn't do that beforehand. So I'm gonna share my screen with you. Are there any questions for me on the agenda, on the minutes? Any corrections that you all identified to be made?
If there are no corrections, I need a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Sal second, Jeff moved and Sal second.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes.
And if I can ask, can you all see my screen or no?
Yes.
Is there anything else?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well then I'm just gonna minimize this real quick. Let's see. Okay, so we did move this up a little bit. I don't think I saw that Sarah was here, so if it's okay with you, Dave, we will we'll
Just skip that one.
yeah, we'll table that one for now, and if she joins us, we can come back to it.
Sure.
Okay.
And we'll check later on to see if she joins us.
Yes.
Assignment of proxies.
Yeah, so assignment of proxies, this is an item that Chairman Martinez was interested in us having a discussion on. And so what we could do is, in terms of establishing a formal process for the proxies, if I can have all of the voting members and non-voting members, if you all can assign up to 2 proxies, that would be, and then email that to me. And then we can have them on our list. And that way, whenever we're having our meetings, if they're going to be serving in your behalf, then we already have that on record in terms of who will be your proxy. If you do not have a proxy, please email me and let me know that as well. We might be able to find some alternates within the region that would be willing to serve in that capacity. I would just check in with you to see if that would be allowable. So that would be I would need to check under our bylaws. I don't know if I don't think that we would need to make any revisions to the bylaws by adding a proxy and going through this manner. So I will verify that, but if for the time being, if anybody would want to make a motion to allow the process to be where all voting and non-voting members will submit up to 2 names for proxies for any meetings that they've got.
This is Omar. So just to clarify a tiny bit, in your bylaws, their proxies are known as designated alternates. And kind of the core idea is that you're not supposed to have more, you're only allowed to have 1 designated alternate representing you at any given time, and no more than 2 in a calendar year. That's what was in the template bylaws, and which you guys should follow now. But again, if you guys would like to change that at any point, you guys can amend your bylaws.
And the way that I'm listening to that, Richard, when you're saying no more than 2 in a calendar year, so you can have up to 2 people serving on your behalf within a calendar year.
But no more than 1 at a time.
Yes, yes, so just
technically you're not supposed to flip-flop, but if your designated alternate switches, it can switch to the second person for the rest of the calendar year.
Okay, I do think it's probably somewhat ambitious for me to ask for you all to give me up to 2 people. But hopefully, if you do it, I know that I think Isela's in that position with water utilities, and so if any of you all have up to 2, then I think that's just a good thing for us to practice in terms of ensuring that we have quorum. And so Omar had made the motion. I don't know if you had a second.
Second.
Giselle.
Okay.
And I guess we need to, any more discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Okay.
Richard, I want to ask you one question. When you said no more than 2 in a year, did you mean that the alternate can represent the primary only twice in a year, or did you mean no more than 2 alternates in a year?
It's the bylaws read the chair shall not recognize more than 2 alternate designations of any kind per member per calendar year, unless the Upper Rio Grande RPG expressly decides to waive this provision.
Okay, so that means that basically what I'm hearing is that we expect the primaries to attend all of the meetings other than those 2 per year. That's correct. Okay, I got it.
It's the intent is to have only 1 designated alternate person at a time.
Okay, understand. But does that, let me go back to my original question then. If an alternate represents the primary more than 2 times in a year, is there an issue with that?
No, that's the alternate can represent each member as many times as needed,
Okay.
as long as you have the 1 designated alternate representing you. And if that designated alternate person switches, then that counts as the 2nd in a calendar year.
Okay, I understand. I just need clarity on the other perspective. Okay, let's see.
Again, in future meetings, you guys do have the ability to waive that provision or amend your bylaws as you see fit.
Understand. Okay, I think the next entry, number 7, is for you, Richard, Texas Water Development Board update.
All right, good morning, everyone. This is Richard Bagans from the Texas Water Development Board. Thank you all for joining. You guys have a lot of great action items today on your agenda. So today's going to be a good, productive day. The 2 kind of major items on the radar are the contract amendments. So the TWDB board met on September 22nd, allocating the additional funding that we received from legislature to give to all the regions for this first cycle of regional flood planning. And Region 14 was allocated $666,400. And so I'll brief you guys in the agenda items 8 and 9 about what those additional tasks are. But the overall intent is that additional funding will go towards additional outreach, data collection, and performing a study, an FME, essentially, a flood mitigation evaluation study, so that you guys can incorporate all of that into an amended regional flood plan. You guys are still legislatively obligated to produce a regional flood plan by your 2022 deadline, but these additional tasks can help you amend your plan and give you a little extra time. So I'll get into those tasks for agenda 8 and 9. The second big item is the tech memo. So you guys are having action items on a lot of the items needed for the tech memo. It's kind of like the midway point deliverable. And so your consultants should be preparing a full tech memo for you guys to review at your December meeting, for you guys to approve the tech memo to be able to submit it to the Water Development Board. So you guys should be seeing that in your meeting materials at your next meeting. And that's all the updates I have at this moment. Does anybody have any questions for me at this time? Again, I'll get into the contract amendment in a second.
I have a question.
Yes.
We were looking at the draft or the cursory floodplain data from Fathom, and we've reviewed the guidance on downloading and post-processing the Fathom data that was posted in late October. And then we noticed also that on the website there's a note that says in the next several weeks the development board expects to have the data available clipped to flood planning regions. Do you have an idea of how that's going, or an estimate for when that clipping might be available?
I don't have an exact timeline to give out yet, but it is currently still being worked on. And to give an estimate, hopefully in the next week or so.
Okay.
But there has been no official determination when that's coming out just yet, but it is being worked on.
Great. Thank
We
you.
were just discussing that. All right, thanks all. If you guys want to move on to the next.
Richard, are you doing number also? Okay.
Yeah, I can present it unless, Annette, if you want to open it at all or no.
Yeah, I'll start out. Hello, Mr. Rodriguez. Renee Rodriguez is present at the meeting as well.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay, so we're on agenda item 8, and this is to discuss and to have a discussion and have potential action to authorize the planning group sponsor, which is the Council of Governments, to negotiate and execute an amendment to the regional flood planning contract grant with Texas Water Development Board. And this is to incorporate the additional funding for the first cycle of the regional flood planning process. And this does include necessary revisions to the contract scope of work. So we did receive this document from Texas Water Development Board. And just in addition to that information, the Council of Governments did have Board of Directors. We had our meeting last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, the 19th of November. And we did present this contract amendment to our board, did approve. But we do, obviously, it's everyone understands that if the planning group has any concerns with the way that the funding has been allocated, if we have to take that back to our board, then we will. But I just wanted to let you know that in terms of the process, what steps we've taken, we've already presented this to our board of directors. And so as you can see here on the contract amendment, in terms of the dollar amounts, here's where it represents the additional funding. And so as required by Water Development Board, we were allowed to use that additional funding into tasks 11, 12, and 13. And so for the Rio Grande Council of Governments, what we initially have as our contract with AECOM is that we have $50,000 in administrative costs and $10,000 in travel costs for members when we're able to do that again. And so with this additional funding, we did request to put some additional funds under outreach. Let's see, I think that's what it is. Yes, under outreach and data collection to support tasks 1 through 9. So of that 116,400, Rio Grande Council of Governments is requesting to increase our administrative budget to 100,000. And currently the cap by Water Development Board is 85,000. And so we were asking for consideration for that additional 15,000. So we have to go through the process, explain our justification to see if that would be approved. But if it weren't approved, then that 15,000 would stay in that task, and then that would be utilized in a different way by, I would assume, our consultant AECOM. The other additional monies are under task 12, and that's 353,192, and then under task 13, it's 196,808. And before I ask AECOM to make any comments, Richard, did you want to add anything else to that before I ask to explain anything with the tasks and the additional monies, what they'd be used for?
Sure, I'll just give a brief overview of the tasks for everyone. So this additional funding can be broken down and allocated into 3 tasks. Task 11 is going to be fully to support your first regional flood plan, specifically for outreach and data collection. When we sent out the survey in July, almost all regions said we need more help and more time to be able to get the data we need. So that money must be spent before your first regional flood plan is submitted. Task 12 and 13 monies can be spent after you guys submit your regional flood plan. It is going towards the amendment to your regional flood, your amended regional flood plan. So task 12 is to perform the flood management evaluations for areas that you immediately need to study, that may need to identify projects or strategies. Again, this is depending on the study area. We expect maybe 1 or 2 or so FMEs to be performed. Task 13 is then to take that data that came out of 12 and have additional public meetings and update all the associated numbers and figures in your flood plan to create the amended flood plan 6 months later. So just Annette, I want to point out, I believe, pretty sure that sponsors can only take out money out of task 13 out of this allocated funding. So I'll double check and back with you and before we submit this contract amendment.
I think I might have misspoken.
Okay.
When I worked it out with Gilbert, it was out of 13. So I'm sorry, I just misspoke.
Okay. So, and just to give everyone full transparency and a heads up, the TWDB submitted just estimated percentage-based numbers to the regions, and we had submitted for task 11 roughly 100,000, for task 12 right at 400,000, and task 13 was 166,000. And so the numbers you see right now have fluctuated based on ACOMs and the sponsors' conversations on where they see the funds can best be utilized. And that's all I have right now.
To accept this?
I think if for the planning group members, would you all like some additional information from ACOM in terms of how they're going to be utilizing those additional monies within the tasks? If not, then we could entertain a motion for approval on the contract amendment for the sponsoring entity to enter into.
So moved.
Second.
And I think just seconded.
And so just to, sorry, one more clarification point. There are 2 agenda items, agenda item 8 and agenda item 9. The first agenda item is allowing Rio Grande COG to re-enter this contract amendment with TWDB. And agenda item 9 is allowing Rio Grande COG to execute the contract amendment with ACOM. The group does have flexibility to choose and procure another technical consultant if they so choose. But just keep in mind the interest of time of this cycle.
Okay, with the understanding of what Richard just explained, is the motion still active or do we need to get a new motion?
It's still active. I don't
Okay.
see that we would want to switch contractors, so.
Okay, at this point, though, the motion that we're voting on is the acceptance between the Texas Water Development Board and the Rio COG. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. And now on to number 9.
Yes, so just as Richard so graciously teed me up for the next agenda item 9, this one here is to authorize the Council of Governments to negotiate and execute an amendment to the flood planning grant subcontract with our technical consultant AECOM, and this would be to incorporate the additional funding. The one thing that I do want to make mention is that we do not have the document ready as of now, but if the group was compelled to entrust the sponsor entity working with our technical consultant, knowing that we can only use the funds in these manners, this manner with regard to the 3 tasks, if allowed, if you all were to approve that today, then we would work on negotiating the contract, preparing it, executing it with the AECOM. And in terms of timeline, we would then present this contract to our board of directors at our January 21st meeting. So that's when it would be executed, because we do need to get approval from our board as well.
Is there any further discussion?
I think you're doing a fantastic job on it, so I don't see why we would oppose to that. But I don't know. Do we need to make a motion or?
If we can make a motion to allow the sponsoring entity to negotiate an exit contract with AECOM for the additional funds, yes, that'd be.
Okay. I want to make a motion for that.
Second.
Who did the second, please?
Rene Rodriguez.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. And you're on for administrative expenses.
Okay, so this is another big one. We've finally come to the point where we're asking for approval from our flood planning group for reimbursement. That's one of the requirements from Water Development Board to present this to you, and we seek approval for that. And so on this screen here, I'm going to make a turn. What you see here is this is what we're asking for is we're asking for $22,849.29 to be reimbursed to Council of Governments for our expenses. This is what we've spent year to date contract execute. And so this is what's representing in terms of the costs going from salaries way down to rent. And so then the next item that we're going to show you is the reimbursement request for AECOM. And so we're showing these expenses by tasks. And so as you can see, AECOM has absorbed expenses with task 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10. And this includes their costs as well as their subcontractors. And so you look at the total amount they're requesting for reimbursement from May until October 29th is going to be $406,868.30. And so as it stands right now with the current contract that we have with AECOM, their agreement is $1,021,800. They're requesting the $406,868.30. So they're showing a percentage completion of 39.82%, where we do have remaining funds of $614,931 with 70 cents. Are there any questions for myself or for AECOM with pertaining to any of these expenses? I know it's a lot. We just weren't able to get to the point where we were asking for it previously. So I think that once we get this first reimbursement under our belt, we'll be able to ask that more frequently, where we're asking in batches of 1 or 2 months as opposed to these several months.
Gilbert, I've got one question I need to ask. Is the percentage of work completed basically commensurate with the amount of funds that have been allocated?
Yeah, that's correct, Dave. We're pretty much moving on task right now, and we're tracking it pretty well. So yes.
So you're pretty comfortable with that? Okay. All right.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. If there's no further discussion, can I get a motion to accept the document, please?
Move to accept.
Second, Gilbert.
Thank you.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
So I will stop sharing the screen and I will turn it over now to AECOM. Mr. Hall, so that way they can give us updates.
That's fine for number 11?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning again, everybody. Gilbert Andujo with AECOM here, and this is another update we're giving you guys as a general update and to cover the progress of our work. And we're also going to be covering a little bit of the draft tech memo on this update. So as well as we'll be looking at subcommittee recommendations. We've got separate items, scheduled on there to do that. And those items are going to be items 12, 13, and 14. And with that being said, I know we've got Brian Blaisdell and Chris Wright will be covering these updates. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Gilbert. Good morning, everyone. As Gilbert mentioned, we'll be covering several agenda items through this presentation. The first of which is just general RP updates. Mainly, we're going to be covering some of the main highlights from the past month, as well as the dates to come, key dates that we're tracking in December and January. So in the month of November, we had several subcommittee meetings. Many of our RFPG members participated in those meetings. We had 2 subcommittee meetings for the first subcommittee on the evaluation and recommendations on the floodplain management, flood mitigation and floodplain, that should say management goals. And in subcommittee 2, we had 2 subcommittee meetings also for that subcommittee. We had 1 meeting for subcommittee 3 on the identification and evaluation of FMEs, FMSs. So all 3 of those, we covered a lot of material and ultimately used those subcommittee, the feedback received during those subcommittee meetings to develop 2 key technical memos, which were posted for public review on November 16th. Those are available on the Upper Rio Grande website. There's also a link to those documents in this presentation for reference later on. We submitted a preliminary draft for the technical memo to the RFPG for preliminary review last Wednesday, just before the Thanksgiving break, and that was for preliminary review. We will allow for any feedback if anyone has any at this meeting, a couple shortly. However, we also do plan to resubmit the document in a formal as our official draft submittal this Friday. So in terms of upcoming dates, I'll cover this in more detail in a couple slides. So in December for the general RFPG meetings, we have one scheduled. This was scheduled for December 16th. I believe it was, I don't have the time on me, but we
9 a.m.
I'm sorry?
9 a.m.
9 a.m. Mountain Time, December 16th.
Yes. And
in that meeting, we will be discussing the official, what we'll be discussing the TWDB responses to AECOM questions regarding levies. We had some couple meetings in November answer with Q&A on several technical items with the Water Development Board. We'll also be discussing planning group comments on the draft technical memo and getting approval to authorize AECOM to submit that technical memo to the Development Board by January 7th deadline. And then the idea there will be if any comments received up until that date, we can note those in our meeting that we can approve or authorize to submit that tech memo with those comments addressed. And so we'll be addressing comments later in the month after, assuming we have been given that approval. If for some reason we do not meet that approval on this December 16th meeting, we also have a backup plan to have a meeting early January, just after the holidays, as a possible alternate date for RPG approval of the tech memo. December 16th would definitely be the preferred date, though. So that's our target, to get that approval and to have any comments by that date. In addition, just looking forward past the tech memo, we in late January, early February timeframe, we'll probably schedule an additional RPG general meeting to review in more detail the FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs and evaluations on those. The subcommittees will continue to meet. Primarily subcommittees 2 and 3. Just subcommittee 2 will meet in middle December on the 14th. Subcommittee 3 will convene on the week after the tech memo is submitted to the development board on the week of January 10th. That date and time are to be determined. And then we also added this subcommittee 4 into the list here. This is to continue the discussions on administrative and regulatory and legislative recommendations. That is the specific date and time on that are also to be determined. So we'll provide more information in subsequent general meetings. We're beginning preparation for the Pecos and Presidio Roadshow open house events. We're tentatively scheduling those for February 9th or 10th. And that we have a couple backup dates the following week. And then we have upcoming for our chapter deliverables. We will be delivering chapters 1 and 2 in March timeframe, and chapters 3, 4, and 5. 4 and 5 are kind of combined into one chapter. Those will be delivered in April, and the remaining chapters will be delivered in July. Then there will be a month of comments to address before the draft RP is delivered to the development board in August, which is the submittal date on that. Are there any questions on any of these dates? In particular, we were interested in getting any feedback from members on the Pecos Presidio Roadshow open house events date. The idea there, to clarify, is we were planning to hold them back to back, one in 2 days. So we'll start with, I believe we'll be starting with Pecos open house event, then travel to Presidio the following day, and then head back after that.
Do you want board members there?
It's certainly great to have board member representation at these meetings. However, it will just depend on your availability, and we also would need to coordinate to make sure there's no quorum during that meeting. But other than that, it's certainly welcome, but up to everyone.
Right. Has anybody been doing some preliminary work to see to pick locations, for example, and check availability back to back?
Yeah, I don't know if Marina, if you want to speak to that a little bit, or.
Yes, we determined our locations. In Pecos, we really like to use the Odessa College Center there on Eddy Street. just nice and centrally located. So we're reaching out to them. And then I sent an email to Annette for some assistance in the Presidio location, because I know that she had mentioned that you all have a good insight there. So we're starting that process, and hopefully we can pin those down and get those finalized.
And for Presidio, I think we're looking at the Presidio Activity Center. So that is the largest area is somewhat of like a gymnasium. They use it for the nutrition center for their senior program as well. So I think that they could block those, make sections out of that main space. So I think that would be a good location for everyone as well.
I would just suggest that we get those reservations in for those as early as possible, and then let people know whether you've selected February or March and what day or days.
Agreed.
Okay. Okay.
All right, great, thank you. Does anyone have any objections to these two dates at this time? February 9th and 10th? Okay, so we will continue that.
So February 9th and 10th are actually selected, huh?
Well, those are, yeah, the tentative dates. Those are when we discussed yesterday, that was our preferred time frame, but we'll revisit this in December in our next RPG meeting with specific dates once we've confirmed availability of the venues.
How far in advance does this need to be announced or notified?
How soon in advance do they need to be scheduled? I believe last time we did about a month in advance. We posted notification and then we started to issue press releases 1 month before.
Let me tell you why I asked the question. February is a notorious month in Texas for ice storms and some pretty bad weather now and then. Just a second thought might be to have an alternate date if in fact the weather is really nasty for some reason, and go ahead and block that alternate set of dates also. And if we need to find alternate dates in March, that might be the best way to do it. Just a thought in case, because there are some pretty nasty storms now and then, especially up in that part of Texas in February.
And are we looking at the evening hours as well?
Yes, we're looking for after work hours, so, probably 4:30 to 7.
Okay.
Okay, I have no other comments from here.
Okay, great, thank you. So this slide is just to recap the task 8 scope of work for subcommittee 4. Since we've met on the previous on subcommittees 1 through 3, we haven't yet had any meetings for subcommittee 4. But 4 will include the legislative recommendations that the RPG considers necessary for floodplain management, planning, and implementation. Any other recommendations, regulatory or administrative. And so this is a great fit for all of the discussions that we've had in various subcommittee meetings and general meetings about counties and the county authority or ability to manage development and floodplains in unincorporated areas. So we wanted to revisit this and give anyone a chance. This was our list of those who indicated that they wanted to participate in one of our first general meetings. So we wanted to offer a chance for anyone who maybe wants to join that subcommittee in light of some of our past meetings. We can have that. We can make those changes now if anyone wants to change their participation status on that. All right.
This is Dave. Why don't you put me down as participating on that too?
Okay.
And understanding those meetings this is for Subcommittee 4 in February?
Yes, that's correct. It hasn't been scheduled, but
Will
Okay.
the other subcommittee meetings be slowing down by then?
I can't say if they will or not.
So go ahead and put me down as participating, and as time allows, I'll try.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
I made a note of that as well, Brian.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Or will they continue to be 2 hours long? Can we make them an hour? It's very hard. So many meetings is very hard.
I can say that the discussions for Subcommittee 4 will be much briefer than many of our past meetings. So if that helps, I can't speak for Subcommittees 2 and 3 though. All right, well, again, this is just a tentative list. So as we get closer to that, we'll reach out again and see if anyone has any changes. But thanks for that feedback. We'll note that for going forward. So looking at the draft technical memo dates in more depth, again, this Friday we'll be submitting the draft tech memo officially to the RPG for review and comment. We're asking for any comments by the Tuesday, December 14th. Then we will meet on Thursday, December 16th to discuss those comments and questions and get that approval. We will, of course, take any comments after that meeting, but the goal would still be to try and get RPG approval to submit that tech memo to the development board on that next general planning group meeting. Then again, the tech memo submittal to the development board will be on Friday, January 7th.
Hey, Brian, it's Dave. How widely does that tech memo draft get distributed for comment?
If I heard Richard correctly, the draft tech memo will be posted for public review with the materials for that meeting, along with the materials for that Thursday RPG meeting. We will also, after that, after we receive approval from RPG, reach out to all the stakeholders with a survey form, kind of similar to how we did it. We've done it for past surveys and get any comments after that point. We can accept comments up until the end of the year, most likely, and incorporate those at the beginning of the year from the public.
Since this is a pretty significant document, I think it needs that wide distribution. Okay.
Right. Okay. All right. If no other comments, Gilbert, can you present the budget progress?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian. And this is just kind of give you guys another snapshot in time. You know, we have to post this information ahead of time. So what we had at the time, which was about, I want to say the middle of November on here, we've had incurred a little more charges. So up to date right now, we're up to a total of about $442,000. So once we get back to submitting the new invoice and like Annette had said, we're going to try and submit them now on a monthly or to a bi-monthly date. So it is going to change, but you know, this is where we're at right now. We've gone up, I think, about 36,000 from the last invoice we submitted, which was through the end of October. If anybody has any questions, y'all can see the estimated progress we have on there for the tasks that we have been working on.
Gilbert, does task 5 include a really good crosswalk check between FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs to make sure there's a decent alignment between all three?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess if nobody has any other questions, Brian, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Okay. So we will, the next agenda item is recommendations on floodplain management standards. These were included in one of the memos that was posted to the website on November 16th. We also sent an email to all the stakeholders on our list the following day to complete a brief survey. I will mention that we received nine responses from that survey, and all of which were positive or no feedback on this particular item. So these next slides are summaries of the recommendations that came from Subcommittee 1. And so, as has been discussed in some of our past general meetings, there were two parts to the Subcommittee 1 discussions. The first part was the recommendations for minimum standards or floodplain management standards in general, as well as the discussion of floodplain management goals, short-term and long-term goals. So we're going to cover both of those parts separately. This first part is the recommendations on the floodplain management standards. Within that, we broke down the recommendations into two parts: the minimum standards and general recommendations. So for the recommendations for minimum standards, we had discussed following the minimum standards outlined in the National Flood Insurance Program, and just generally recommending that all entities participate and maintain active status in that program. There are a number of benefits to that, including reduction in flood risk, and just covering your community in the case of a flood disaster. They may be able to seek get insurance for their properties through that program. As part of that NFIP, there are several requirements, specific requirements depending on different flood zones. We pulled out several of those requirements in particular that we thought were most relevant to our region. For those that would for those areas that do not fall within a Zone AE floodplain, which includes a lot of the region, we pulled out these two bullet points, which are general universal minimum standard recommendations. In terms of requiring development permits for all proposed construction, and requiring new and replacement sanitary sewage and water supply systems within the flood-prone areas to be designed to minimize damage from floodwaters. In addition, for areas that are in Zone A or AE, there are additional requirements, and so we've linked those there. And there are also additional requirements for minimum standards for areas with prone to mudslides or erosion. So all these minimum standards have been linked here, and ultimately the RPG is recommending all entities in the region follow or pass those standards and potentially participate in the NFIP based on that. To clarify here, and this discussion has come up a lot in several of our meetings, in future planning cycles, these recommendations may be adopted as minimum requirements which communities must meet to include those their flood needs, those FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs in that future regional flood plan. This is discussed and recommended by the subcommittee. It's also consistent with several other regions and what they're doing across the state. So the idea there is in future planning cycles, communities will need to meet those minimum or may need to meet those minimum requirements if they are adopted by the RPG in future cycles. So this is just to let everyone know about that future target, but to also clarify, the minimum requirements will not apply to this first cycle flood plan based on the subcommittee recommendations. And the idea there is just given the quick time frame of this first cycle, it was determined that the speed of this first cycle flood plan, due to that speed, it was important to include all communities and not to put forward any minimum requirements at this time. Then in terms of general recommendations, these are additional recommendations that will not be tied, are not intended to be tied to any sort of minimum standards in the future. They include flood outreach and awareness. Entities should coordinate with TxDOT and the National Weather Service, conduct public outreach to identify ongoing flood needs separate from the flood plan, just to continue that flood planning process even after the flood plan is concluded. It's also recommended that entities develop and maintain local stormwater asset management plans to help to maintain their systems, and adopt any higher than Nfip minimum standards, participate in the TFMA higher standard survey, which doing so may make the communities eligible for the CRS program, and enrolling in that can help reduce flood insurance premiums and flood risk further. Then lastly, the general recommendations include considering and incorporating nature-based practices in flood mitigation projects. So those are the recommendations from the subcommittee. Wanted to turn it over to the group at this time, ask if there are any comments, feedback before we take an action to vote. And I guess once we determine there are no comments, and I'll allow Dave to raise a motion to vote.
All right, I was sleeping.
So does anyone have any comments?
Yeah, any comments from anyone? Okay, can I get a motion to?
So moved.
I'm sorry. Is that Javier?
I can't tell.
Who made the motion?
Oh, Levi Bryan, motion.
Second, Sal Masood.
Okay, the motion is to adopt region-specific minimum standards or recommendations along with specific lists defining standards or recommendations. Okay, we've got a motion.
Well, to clarify, the motion would be to recommend minimum standards and general recommendations. There wouldn't be any adopting.
Okay, then. Okay,
so I can change this action
in the wording. Okay, let's correct that, and then so everybody can see the correction.
Do you want me to push my motion again?
Hang on a minute until he finishes. Okay, are we finished then, Brian?
Yes.
Okay, let's please. We had a motion and a second. What we need to do is address that motion in a second, and I would suggest that nobody vote in favor of it as we go. So I need all in favor of the motion on the floor. Okay, all opposed?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Okay, now we need a new motion to accept the action as listed currently on the slide.
I'll move for a motion as currently shown on slide 16.
I second.
Okay. All right. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
All right, thanks, Dave. So moving forward to agenda item 13, we also will be discussing the RPG will be adopting these flood mitigation and floodplain management goals. So a summary of the different goals that were discussed as part of the subcommittee, they include various goals on floodplain management practices, flood risk identification, flood risk reduction, flood data forecasting and warning, flood warnings, flood infrastructure design, flood infrastructure funding, and O&M. And just to recap, there will be two types of goals: short-term goals and long-term goals. Short-term was defined as 10 years starting from the date of the flood plan through up to 2033, and then the long-term goals are 30 years up to 2053. So there's this map here shows the Huck 8 boundaries, and this is just for reference because we used the Huck 8 boundaries in some cases to differentiate specific goals for specific areas. So the next slides, which I won't read in full detail, are taken from those tech memos that we posted to the website, and the different categories, they're kind of grouped or ordered in these categories. So we rearranged the goals and the goal IDs from what was presented in the subcommittee meeting just for clarity. So the several of the goals will have a short-term and long-term version of those goals. And then in some cases, we opted to just have a short-term goal and focus on those short-term targets, and then reevaluate the need for a long-term target in future planning cycles. So here we have NFIP participation goals. We have goals related to higher standards and the CRS ratings. And I'll mention here that this improving CRS rating is intended to be for the city of El Paso, which has a current CRS rating of 9. And then that's in the short term. That group is continued here. The higher standards, Levy accreditation, that topic has come up a lot in our general meetings and subcommittee meetings. And so this goal is to increase flood protection of those unaccredited levees to meet the FEMA levy accreditation requirements, and then update the flood mapping after that to account for any changes. That's a short-term goal by 2033. Then we also have goals on flood gauges, on region-wide flood warning and communication, community flood awareness and flood plan participation. Some more on that. We have improving coverage of flood hazard data, mainly to address the FMEs that may come up in the first cycle RFP. We also have several goals reducing flood risk to structures and low water crossings. And the structures will be evaluated based on the 1% annual chance floodplain, and the low water crossings will be evaluated based on the 10% annual chance floodplain, just based on design, their typical design criteria. So also in this for these particular goals, the subcommittee recommended having separate goals for El Paso, which is which includes this goal 09001 of removing 10% of existing structures from the 1% annual chance floodplain, whereas outside of El Paso, the goal is a little bit higher, removing 25% of existing structures. The the difference there was acknowledging that El Paso, just given the higher number of potential structures impacted, would have a smaller target in the short term compared to the rest of the region, because the total number of structures removed would still be comparable to the rest of the region. And then for the long term, similar to that, there are separate goals for El Paso and outside of El Paso. And then for the low water crossings, there's one goal for the entire region, in both short term and long term. So the El Paso specific goals are mainly for the removal of existing structures from the floodplain. And the removal can take place either by remapping or through flood risk reduction. And then lastly, we have goals on regional stormwater detention, nature-based practices, dual-use stormwater water supply structures, stormwater asset management plans, and flood infrastructure funding. So again, I'll open it up to the group if there are any comments, questions, modifications to any of those goals.
I like the fact that you reorganize these into groups. I think it's much easier to understand and see them that way.
Okay, great.
Renee?
Yes, sir.
Did you want to comment?
I was, but never mind.
Oh, all right.
And if possible, Mr. Rodriguez, if you can have the camera on, that's one of the requirements they're asking for us on these virtual meetings, if it's possible. Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
We need a motion to accept the recommendations for minimum standards. Is that correct technology, Brian?
Yeah, or adopt, the RPG will be adopting short-term and long-term goals as listed in this presentation.
I make the motion to adopt the short-term and long-term goals.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye, I see some hands too. Okay, any opposed? All right, motion passes.
All right, thank you, everyone. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Wright, and he will be presenting the agenda item 14.
All right, thank you, Brian. Excuse me. So I'm going to cover the 3 meetings that we had for subcommittees 2 and 3, which, just as a reminder, the subcommittee 2 is for identifying and evaluating FMPs, while subcommittee 3 is for identifying and evaluating FMEs and FMSs. We did develop a memo that we sent out November 16th, which outlined the process that we used for identifying and evaluating FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs. That is on the RFPG website. And to date, we on the survey that we sent out to request any feedback, we haven't received any negative feedback. We did receive a comment related to the evaluation of levies on the Mexico side, and since that was more specific to an actual FME or FMS, it wasn't really relevant to the overall process. Then we're not planning on changing the process based on that comment, but everything else has been either positive or no comment as far as the feedback we've received from that survey. All right, next slide. So again, I'm going to go through these three subcommittee meetings where we talked about the process for identifying FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs. And in the end of this overview, we'll be asked to vote on that process, which is described in the memo that we sent out November 16th. That same language from that process memo is also copied into the preliminary draft memo that you all received last week on the 24th. So I won't go through this whole agenda, but this subcommittee 2 was this meeting was the second meeting of subcommittee 2 held on November 4th. This was the agenda. We talked about the overall process of identifying FMPs, and we focus this meeting in particular on how we would filter down the amount of projects that are included in the El Paso City Stormwater Master Plan and the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan, which were both recently developed in 2021. Next slide. So this content, this slide basically shows a flow chart of the overall process. We have over 150 projects that we start out with, considering master plans, projects from TxDOT, the Corps, IBWC, EPCWID, and we filter those down to those that could potentially have a negative impact. Those would be immediately identified as not feasible. For those that don't appear to have a negative impact, we need to filter those projects down to a manageable number based on the budget and the time that we have for this first cycle of the regional flood plan. And so we threw out a number, from greater than 150 down to somewhere greater than 30. That is a ballpark estimate. It's going to be really based on the complexity of the projects and the information available for those projects, which really determines what that number is. And once we kind of winnow down that initial set of projects to a reasonable number, we'll look deeper at the information available, the modeling that's available, and if there are sufficient project details to demonstrate what the impacts are and that there's no negative impact and what those benefits are, then we can recommend those projects for further evaluation by TWDB. If during that evaluation process we find out there's not enough information, we may choose to turn those FMPs or FMSs into FMEs or studies, which would then be used to develop those FMPs and FMSs at a later stage, whether that's the amended RFP or whether that's the next cycle of the regional flood plan. Next slide. So this is the overall list of information that we need to develop when we go through this evaluation process. And so we can't go through this process for all 172 projects that we've identified so far. We need to, like I said, based on budget and time constraints, filter those down to a reasonable number that we can evaluate and recommend as part of this regional flood plan. And there's some of these criteria that we can pull out based on information we already have, such as the number of structures in the 100-year floodplain, which is highlighted in yellow there. And that's the existing 100-year floodplain, which will be based on our overall floodplain quilt. But there are some other factors that you need detailed modeling to develop, such as the amount that you're going to remove from the floodplain or the amount where flooding might get reduced. So you need detailed models for that. And there is an initial list of projects that we're going to start out with, and we're going to winnow them down so that we can go through all these different criteria for the smaller subset of projects that we're looking at. Next slide. So for the City of El Paso stormwater master plan, we talked about two sets of categories that were used to prioritize those projects. On the left, you have the project benefits and the points that were assigned to each of those categories. You can see for remove the fourth one on that list, remove 100 plus properties from the flood zone. That's sort of a general category that was not based on modeling or necessarily on the same amount of modeling. It's a high level estimate. And for complexity, permit complexity on the right, these were different permitting categories that were agreed upon with the city in certain points, whether they're negative or positive points. You can see at the bottom were assigned for each one of those permitting categories. Together with those two scores combined, that overall score was used to rank the city stormwater master plan projects. Next slide. We talked about the El Paso County Stormwater Master Plan and the prioritization process that was applied for that plan. It had two stages. The first stage considered these categories shown on the left to develop an overall flood score. The projects were then grouped into three tiers or three different categories based on the flood scores. The highest flood scores were tier 1, the lowest flood scores were tier 3. And within each of those categories or tiers, the projects were ranked again based on their benefit cost ratio. So this was a little bit different than how the El Paso City Stormwater Master Plan was set up. Next slide. And this just gives you an idea of those criteria in that stage 1 scoring system and how many points were assigned to each of those criteria. Next slide. So the overall process for considering those specific stormwater master plans that we landed on at the end of this meeting was that we would consider the prioritization that was already established in both plans. However, there was a caveat for the city stormwater master plan that we would want to also add a category for a scoring category for whether there was a disruption in the communities. For the county stormwater master plan, there were a couple caveats. One of them was that we would consider any additional projects that may have been identified from the recent flooding, and also that we would not consider two of the projects from that plan which have already been identified for funding from the TWDB Flood Infrastructure Fund. Those would be included in the ongoing or existing projects, but they wouldn't be included for recommendation for additional funding since they've already been funded. Next slide. And so just to kind of summarize what we also discussed is those were two specific stormwater plans, but the overall process is if we identify any additional stormwater plans, we would address them the same way that we address the city and county of El Paso stormwater plans, is that we would look at all the projects in the list together. We'll review the ranking system and discuss if there's any modifications we want to make to that ranking system, like we did for the city stormwater plan. We added that category about community disruption. Then we'll look at the overall scores after they've been adjusted or not adjusted, and select a group of projects based on those overall scores. If the project is not part of a prioritized list, then we will create a list of those projects. We will then look at factors for scoring those projects, which we'll discuss in the subcommittees, and then we'll choose an option for selecting which of those projects undergo the further evaluation after looking at those scores. And that option or the categories and scoring are discussed in the tech memo that was provided on November 16th. But we'll get into this second group of if the project is not part of prioritized list in the next subcommittee that I'm going to talk about right now, which was subcommittee 2, meeting number 3. So I'll pause there for a second. I know that's a lot of information. If there are any other questions right now or any questions related to what I just presented, feel free to speak up. It looks like we have one question. Renee, go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. I know that El Paso County and the city of El Paso also have their own plans. So I just want to give my 2 cents and the question, right? My 2 cents is that since they already have their own individual plans, I know that in the city of Socorro, they wanted to do their own, but when it came down to it, the reason why they didn't, we decided not to go with the El Paso County and the city of El Paso was because we were told that any other plans that we had, they would have to be put in the back burner of their own list that they already had prioritized. So because we came late into the game, they were going to do their projects first. And then by the time if there was any funding available, because our funding was going to be in their pool as well. So they were going to capture the funding and then look at our projects. But since our projects are at the end, then they would have used up all our money to do their projects first. So my question is our projects, our proposals for review of our projects, are they going to be put aside until El Paso and the county decide to do their own, or we're going to be in parallel, which is they'll do theirs and we'll do ours at the same time? That is the question.
Okay, thank you for that. And Gilbert Saldana from the county, I believe he might be on the line, and so feel free to add any comments you might have or correct me if you disagree with anything I'm about to say. But it depends if there is actually a stormwater plan that Socorro has developed or details related to their specific projects or models developed for those specific projects, as well as costs. Do you know if that information is available or documented somewhere that can be provided to AECOM for consideration, or are those projects from Socorro already considered in the county stormwater master plan?
Oh, no. Chris, sorry about that. Let me, when Socorro was going to start doing that, the reason why they didn't was because of the county and the El Paso Water District were gonna pull the money that we were gonna put aside for projects for us, right? It's for the city. But when we started to look into it about, okay, what our money was gonna go into the pool, and then when we started to look at our own projects, they were gonna have to be put in the back burner. That's why we decided not to do anything. So I know that we don't have any plans because of that, because we didn't want to wait 10 years, 15 years down the line when we needed it, but we were paying into the pool and there was no money for us when it came to it. That's the question. The question is, since we're doing this, are we going to be subject to the same thing as to, if we're going to be in prioritized and then we're going to move forward on our projects, or it's first come, first serve basis? That's the question on this project.
Thanks for clarifying. Okay, so since in this particular situation, there are not projects that have already been identified and models set up and costs developed, it would fit into a potential FME or a study, which can be used to develop those details later on, or a potential strategy, which is a general plan that could involve multiple projects or recurring costs, like such as maintenance activities. So we will consider we'll talk about that here in a little bit when we talk about the process for FMEs and FMSs. But because we don't already have a study or a project identified, that's documented with a cost estimate, it wouldn't fall into that list of FMPs unless there's models that could be developed really quickly and efficiently. But it's likely that it would instead be an FME or FMS, and it would be considered with all the FMEs, FMSs within the region, and it'll go through this process that I'm about to describe here later on in the presentation. So if you hang in there with me, you'll see, I think, where you fit in when we talk about FMEs and FMSs.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this is Subcommittee 2, meeting number 3. So again, Subcommittee 2 is focused on FMPs, flood mitigation projects. And the last meeting I just discussed focused on specifically the El Paso City and County Stormwater Master Plans and how we're going to address those groups of projects that are already prioritized and have cost estimates prepared, and how we winnow those down to a manageable number. This meeting focused on other projects which are identified throughout the region, which have also already been planned out, and they have cost estimates or models developed. And how do we evaluate which of those move forward to this more detailed evaluation process? That was kind of the focus of this meeting. And what is that process? So go ahead, next slide. So just a general outline of the other projects that we're talking about that were identified besides the city and county master plans. We had 2 sediment basins for IBWC, as well as levee improvements, which were broken into several projects throughout El Paso County. We had 3 projects identified through EPC WID number 1. We had USACE projects that we identified through that coordination, about 3 of them. With about 4 TxDOT projects. We're still waiting on an information request from TxDOT. We got an update today that we'll get those projects or that feedback from them December 14th. So there may be some more TxDOT projects, but we've identified about 4 so far. And then there's about 4 projects from the survey, stakeholder survey that we sent out. This was a snapshot at the time of where we were. The recent memo that we submitted, the preliminary draft, has more projects, and it kind of describes these ones that I've listed here in more detail. So, but this is where we were at the time for all the projects outside of the city and county master plans. Go ahead, next slide. So the overall process that we discussed in this subcommittee meeting to winnow down those projects outside of El Paso County is we want to propose to base it on the same process that was used when developing the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan, with a few additional categories. So that's where this table 1 comes from. You can see on the left the source there. So those first several rows were from the City of El Paso, were categories that were also used in the City of El Paso Stormwater Master Plan. And these 3 categories added at the bottom are from TWDB data that we have readily available. So we could kind of look at all of these factors as sort of a snapshot and develop a scoring method, assign points to each one of these rows that could be used to develop an overall score. And again, this is described in the November 16th tech memo that we submitted. It's also included in the preliminary draft memo. Next slide. This is another category similar to the city stormwater plan. There was also a second group of categories for evaluation of the complexity related to permits. So we would take the overall score from that first group of criteria, and then we would add or subtract 1 or 2 points based on the permit complexity. We would then use this overall score to rank and prioritize these projects that are not included in other stormwater master plans. Next slide. So just as an overview, again, as we talked about in the previous meeting, for city or county master plans, we would address all the projects that list together. We'd review that modified ranking system and choose an option for selecting which projects undergo further evaluation. If it's not part of a prioritized list, we would create a new list of all those regional projects. We would use those factors in those tables 1 and 2 that we discussed. There is one correction I'll add to table. If you could go back 2 slides, Brian, there's one thing I left out. So we are going to cross-check this overall list of criteria with our goals and make sure that they're in alignment. So that was one comment that we received. And we're also planning on sending out the proposed number of points for each of these in an email in advance, so that the subcommittee 2 members can review those and be prepared to discuss any proposed changes they may have. We're also going to be sure to define what we mean by nuisance flooding in that email, as well as provide some examples of the factors that are considered in vulnerability, which is one of the TWDB categories that we're evaluating. So I just wanted to mention those 2 caveats. Let me go back to that slide. So based on those tables 1 and 2, we will then develop a point system in the next subcommittee 2 meeting. And based on those total scores, kind of look at the groups. If there's clear gaps of where we need to cut off the list and decide at that point. We'll discuss that once those scores are developed. But this is describing the general overall process for winnowing down all of the FMPs to a smaller list. This next subcommittee meeting I'm going to describe then goes into the FMEs and FMSs. I'll pause here again one more time before we talk about the process for FMEs and FMSs and just ask if there's any additional questions or comments about what I've talked about. Okay. To get into the last subcommittee meeting. I
didn't get to my button quick enough, Brian.
Chris.
Or Chris, I'm sorry. I didn't get to my mute button quick enough. Do you have a hypothetical list put together of the greater than or around 30 projects that you think might be reasonable, or you guys worked on that yet?
We are waiting to go through that process. I mean, we have a list of projects in the tech memo right now. We have everything that's in that tech memo. It comes out to about 191 either FMEs, FMSs, or FMPs, and we don't have a preliminary list at this point. We are needing to finish this process to develop that list with the regional flood planning group.
Okay.
So the subcommittees are going to be, we need that feedback from them to winnow that down. So not at this time, but the full list can be reviewed in the preliminary draft tech memo.
Yeah, I saw it there. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. So this slide, this last subcommittee meeting that I'll cover here today was on November 10th, and this was the 3rd meeting for Subcommittee 3. Subcommittee 3 is focused on FMEs and FMSs, and we basically went through the process of having staff describe their experiences in different historic floods, and then we stopped at the point where we developed the needs for the issues that they discussed. We didn't go to the step of developing a list of studies and strategies to address those needs because we ran out of time. But we did jump to the next agenda items, which was discussing the overall process for FMEs, FMSs, which was what was outlined in the November 16th memo, and we voted on that process like we did for the FMPs in the previous Subcommittee 2 meetings. Next slide. So Two of the storms we discussed in this meeting were the 2006 storm in El Paso, as well as the 2021 storm that just happened in August in El Paso. And then go ahead, next slide. We also discussed the 2008 flood in Presidio and Ojinaga, which had to do with flooding of the Rio Conchos and then the Rio Grande downstream of that to Amistad Reservoir. Next slide. So the overall experiences were discussed by staff from EP Water, City of El Paso County, EPC WID number 1, USIBWC, and Hudspeth County. And that was just this meeting, but we could have others, stakeholders, discuss their issues in future meetings as well. We talked about the primary public concerns, whether there's an early warning system, whether it was adequate, if there were any issues with emergency routes or critical facilities, if there were any post-flood cleanup issues, or general coordination. These were just the general topics that we kind of talked about for each of the presenters' flood experiences. Next slide. So besides this process of presenting during a subcommittee meeting, we could also identify FMEs or FMSs based on coordination that AECOM has had with stakeholders outside of subcommittee meetings. We would then present those in either subcommittee 2 or subcommittee 3, depending on if it's an FMP or an FME and FMS. And we could present those on behalf of those stakeholders, or those stakeholders could present those issues themselves. But we could also present issues that we identified through desktop or risk analyses. So that's just, and I know that there's a lot of issues that we can talk about, so we'll try to streamline that process as much as possible by sending out lists in advance, such as the list in the pre-draft memo that you've already seen there. So we won't have to go into as much detail as we did in this meeting as far as identifying those issues for all the issues in the region. Next slide. So the process that we voted on in this meeting was essentially what I just described for identifying FMEs and FMSs. We select recent historic flood events. We have presentations by stakeholders on those flood events. We have public discussion about what are the needs that we think are there based on the issues and the flood issues described. Then we discuss, okay, the part we didn't get to yet, which we'll get to in the next subcommittee 3 meeting, are what are the FMEs and the FMSs that come out of those needs that were identified. And then lastly, the subcommittee votes on how to proceed with those FMSs and FMEs, and that's then presented to the overall general flood planning group for approval. So that's the overall process for FMEs and FMSs. And so lastly is the action to vote, which would be the approval of the process to identify FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs, which I just discussed, and which is described in detail in the memo we submitted on November 16th. It's also included in the pre-draft memo. So I guess I'll turn it over to Ned at this time, unless there's any questions on the FME, FMS process that we talked about, or even on the FMP process. I'll be happy to address those. But if not, I'll just turn it back to Annette for action to vote.
Okay, the terminology is correctly listed in the action to vote line this time?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm open for a motion.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, is there any further discussion? The hot mic there somebody needs to mute their system. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. And the motion is approval of process to identify and evaluate potential FMEs, FMSs, and FMPs as described in the 11/16/21 technical memo. Okay.
All right, thank you. I think that's all that we have from AECOM. I don't know, Brian, Gilbert, anything left to add before we hand it back?
No, I think we're good. I just appreciate your time listening to us, and we're good to go. Thanks.
Hey, before we adjourn, I want to remind everybody that the next general meeting is 16 December at 9 o'clock. 16 December at 9 a.m. And then I guess if there's no other comments or input from anybody, we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Let's do all
Thank
in
you.
favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Sorry.
All right, motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you
all. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you everybody for your time and effort and support. This has been a long haul, and so just really shows the dedication from the entire group in terms of this process. So thank you for allowing us to be here with you to go through that.
Thanks, Annette. And I appreciate the coordination between you and Dave out there. Color purple.
Yes.
All we can do is try.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.